I'm getting a little tired of mock drafts giving the Chicago Bears a running back at the 10th overall pick not named Ashton Jeanty, because if the Bears are even going to consider a running back in that spot, it's the kid from Boise State or no one else.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, I want to look at Jeanty versus the rest of this running back class and why the Jeanty at 10 conversation is its own debate, but there can't be another running back even in that conversation. That we've seen mock drafts with Omarion Hampton from North Carolina as an option for the Bears as early as the 10th overall pick. Even seen one with TreVeyon Henderson from Ohio State as an option with the 10th overall pick. And there's just not a reality here where any running back is the best player available with the 10th pick unless they're named Ashton Jeanty. And even in that scenario, it can depend, right? There can be other options that are better than him too. So with Omarion Hampton visiting the Chicago Bears on Monday as part of a pre-draft visit, I want to sort of check in on the separation of this running back class. Because like personally, I'm not even certain I love Jeanty as the 10th overall pick here, but I can understand and see why it makes sense. And I can see a scenario and a reality where if you're just truly going to say who is the best player available on our draft board, regardless of position, go get the good football player and figure out the positional value and the fit and everything else later on. That can be Jeanty in a lot of different scenarios. We've seen how dominant and dynamic of a running back he is and how he excels in almost every area of the position. That he looks like the same caliber of truly special running back that we see go in the top 10 and often have a lot of success. But some people love North Carolina's Omarion Hampton. Some people even have Hampton over Ashton Jeanty in this draft class. Some people love Ohio State's TreVeyon Henderson. There's Ohio State's Quinshon Judkins is also a top running back prospect in this draft. And we kind of get to the point where people say, well, could two running backs go in the top 10? If Jeanty goes, 6 to the Raiders or 7 to the Jets or whatever, could the Bears go Hampton at 10? He's probably the only one that I would truly fully consider in this spot. And he's a guy who has been mocked to the Bears a couple of different times. You look around the draft world. I think the most recent one was Doug Farrar from Athlon Sports, who Doug's a great guy, and I've met Doug before, and he does good work. I'm not to be critical of anyone's individual mock drafts, but like from my perspective, I just don't see Hampton as a player worth that. And then when former running back Maurice Jones-Drew puts out a mock draft on NFL.com that has TreVeyon Henderson from Ohio State with the 10th overall pick, now we're really, really getting a little bit beyond the scope of likelihood or reality. And of course, the NFL draft is unpredictable. And especially in this year's draft class, we could see some wild picks happen where running backs go earlier than we think they might, or they go later, or offensive linemen go. I mean, this is going to be a draft where mock drafts are going to be more wrong than they usually are, which is already fairly wrong here. But I think, like specifically Omarion Hampton from North Carolina might be my least favorite realistic pick for the Bears at 10. Right? Obviously, they're going to take a kicker. Like obviously, there's picks that would be worse, right? A quarterback. But those aren't realistic. But players that are actually floating around in this conversation that isn't just one person floating out there as a crazy idea, but like multiple people have suggested this as a possibility. Hampton, to me, it's bad value there. And I don't love Hampton as a prospect either. I mean, he's got really good size and ran a really fast 40-yard dash for his size. I mean, he ran like a 4.47 or 4.48 at 220 pounds. Like, he is big and has that long speed. But for me, Hampton doesn't have any kind of special like explosiveness and burst. And so when you've got a player who's big and fast, how often does he get to have the runway to reach that 40-yard dash speed? Yeah, of course, if you clear a perfect hole for him and he can break free into the open field, he's going to run away from everybody. And that's great. And not every running back can do that. I'm not here to say Hampton is a bad prospect at all. He'll likely be a first-round pick and a very good running back in the NFL, but not 10th overall pick in the draft. Not in the Ashton Jeanty caliber of player. He's not a guy to me that has that kind of like create for himself quick burst explosiveness that can take a play that's broken down. Maybe you don't have ideal blocking and he can create something out of nothing that isn't exactly there. Like, yeah, he can be physical and get you a couple extra yards after contact. And when you break free, he can break free. But like, you add in that he fumbled, I think, like 5 different times. He's got a fumble rate that's a little bit troublesome. He's not been particularly great in pass protection either. And it's just like, it's hard enough to talk me into a running back with the first round pick at 10. We can get there on Jeanty. But then you add some flaws some more flaws than what Jeanty has and some limitations there. Like, I cannot justify taking a running back like that. And same thing with Trayvon Henderson. I think that one's a little bit more understandable for everybody that, yeah, he's not up in that category either. Like, these guys are just not that caliber of player. They're very good. And it feels like when you talk bad about a draft prospect, you're saying he's a bum who's never going to be any good. But there's just a clear gulf between Jeanty and these other guys in the draft class. When you look at things like the rate of missed tackles forced, Jeanty's is like almost, it's like 50+% better than Omarion Hampton. Ashton Jeanty forced a missed tackle on 40% of his running plays to Hampton's 26%, or Henderson's at 26% as well. Like, it's a huge, huge difference in how often you're forcing missed tackles. Even yards after contact, Jeanty's got almost a full yard on both Omarion Hampton and Henderson in terms of, on average, how many yards he's creating after contact. Yes, Henderson and Hampton have great, breakaway run percentages, and they've got pretty good EPA added on those running plays. But when you talk about Jeanty being really the main option in his offense, everyone knew Jeanty was going to get the ball. They knew they were going to run the ball. Everyone was only trying to stop Ashton Jeanty. That certainly wasn't the case at Ohio State, and even to a lesser extent at North Carolina, right? Like, but the Boise State offense was all Ashton Jeanty, and the success he had on top of that is what makes that so impressive. So to me, like, yeah, Jeanty at 10 is a real conversation that I can be talked into a little bit. Hampton and Henderson especially, no chance, not even close at 10. Where they can enter this conversation is okay, if you trade down, is that where you could land on one of these running backs? It's more tolerable at that point because of the added picks and where the big board might lay out. You could start to make the argument of those guys being closer to the best player available at 18 instead of 10, at 20 instead of 10, if the Bears were to find a trade down partner. So we'll take a look at what that might look like and why that might be more tolerable at that part of the draft before we have the same conversation about the tight ends, Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever look at your bank account and wonder, whoa, where did all that money go? That last paycheck went quickly. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it can be easy to lose track. But that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. It's not just a budgeting app. Monarch Money is a complete financial command center. I've got the Monarch Money app on my phone, and I love it that I can track all my accounts, investments, and spending in one place. Instead of having an app for my checking account and an app for my credit card and an app for my retirement account and an app for my other investments, it's all connected through my Monarch Money app that makes it super easy to manage my money, track my spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. I just can't see a world where Omarion Hampton or any running back not named Ashton Jeanty is worth the 10th overall pick. But that sell becomes a little bit easier if the Bears were to find a trade down partner. I'm not sure I love it still, but it's an easier sell because when I think about, first of all, talking about best player available, there's just not a world where even if Jeanty's off the board, that Omarion Hampton and or Trayvon Henderson or any other running back, but Hampton's the one who's visiting the Bears this week and has been more directly tied in this conversation where that all lines up properly. Like, if you think about generally, we don't know exactly who's going to be on the board when the Bears pick at 10, but we kind of have a feeling, right, that Mason Graham from Michigan's probably going to be gone. The offensive lineman Will Campbell and Armand Membu might be gone. Ashton Jeanty's probably going to be gone. Tyler Warren from Penn State could be there, could not be there. But, let's say generally like most of those guys you like aren't going to be there. So then, right, that's where Omarion Hampton enters this conversation because it's like, well, if all the top players in the draft are gone, if you're somebody who really likes Omarion Hampton, like he could be in this conversation. But I also think there's going to be other good players there that it's super hard to sell to me as better than Hampton at 10. Like Kelvin Banks from Texas, Will Johnson from Michigan, any of the defensive linemen like Michael Williams, Shamar Stewart, Mike Green, James Pierce, a defensive back like Shadé Barron or Malachi Starks from Georgia. Like you could like any of these guys better than Omarion Hampton, I think pretty clearly, maybe all of those guys I mentioned. We're talking about best player available. Maybe running back can be more of a need than some of these other spots, but just give me the most talented player here. But if you trade down from 10 to 18, for example, I keep using 18 as the Seahawks because I know they have some draft capital and could be in the market for potentially moving up for a quarterback or a number of different positions there. But you could throw in, the Falcons at 15 or the Steelers at 21. I mean, pick your team, right? But if you go 6 to 8 to 10 picks farther down from 10, all of a sudden, 6 or 8 or 10 of these other players that you like are off the board, right? Maybe Tyler Warren's gone, Kelvin Banks is gone, some of the DBs are gone. Maybe not all the pass rushers are gone, but 2 or 3 of them are gone. Maybe even Josh Simmons from Ohio State could be gone at that point. And all of a sudden, you start to get down into a range of players at 17, 18, 20, whatever the pick is going to be, where Hampton can at least be in the conversation in more of a real way. If you're trying to decide between, you've got Omarion Hampton, you've got maybe the South Carolina safety, Nick Emanuori. I don't think Kenneth Grant from Michigan, the defensive lineman, might be there. Maybe not. Derek Harmon from Oregon, Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. Like that's when you can start to sell me a little bit more. And if you feel like Hampton is the good scheme fit in this zone where he's kind of cut and go, and he can just turn on the Jets when he makes that one cut, as a fit in Ben Johnson's offense, like then we can start to sell me on this idea a little bit more of like he can be a best player available option there. And it's easier to swallow because I know then that in order to move down, I have acquired some amount of additional draft picks. And I don't feel like my whole draft is contingent on hitting on this first round pick running back, right? Like if you were to take Hampton at 10 and it doesn't work out that well, like it's going to be hard to overcome by bolstering, by what you do with the second round and third round picks, like to get enough out of this draft class, right? You want to leave your first 4 picks with at least 4 future starters and ideally all 4 of them, or at least 3 future starters and ideally all 4 of them as future starters. It puts a lot of pressure to say, man, at 39 and 41, you got to get an edge rusher, you got to get an offensive lineman, whatever the combination might be to really fill out these holes on your roster. But if you trade down from 11 or trade down from 10, and add some extra picks, and you still get Hampton at 17 or wherever you trade down to, and then you got an extra second or third round pick or combination of picks in there, all of a sudden I can build a draft class that's got Hampton at the top and then a left tackle and then an edge rusher and then a defensive tackle and then a tight end and then a safety. And you're like, wow, I've had the opportunity to add young, cheap talent at all of these other positions. That makes it so much easier to have the luxury of a running back draft pick there, right? Taking a running back in the first round is absolutely a luxury. And that luxury is easier to afford if that comes with a trade down, extra picks that let you add more of the sort of meat and potatoes players that fill out your trenches and give you good young depth across your roster. And that's where someone like Omarion Hampton re-enters that conversation there. It becomes so much more tolerable of a situation to say, yes, I can do the splurge type of deal by taking the running back that excites me and then still be able to keep plugging the holes in the foundation of your roster that you want to keep stocked with young talent. Because it's easy to go through a mock draft simulation, right? If you use your mock draft simulator of choice at PFF or whatever, and you take a running back in the first round and maybe a tight end in the second round and one offensive line, but like it's hard to hit everything you'd like to hit, right? Because when you go through this draft and you go through your mock draft simulators, you don't want to reach at any position, but ideally, you go through the draft and you'd like to get an edge rusher, you'd like to get an interior defensive lineman, you'd like to get, ideally, a left tackle and an interior offensive lineman, you'd like to get a safety of the future, you'd like to get a young tight end to be the number 2 behind Cole Kmet, you'd like to get a wide receiver, a young wide receiver to keep developing, to add more depth at that spot. Maybe another young cornerback or a linebacker of the future if Edmonds and Edwards are on short-term deals. Like I'm talking about, I just mentioned 9 different players in 9 different positions. And of course, the Bears in this year's draft class currently have 7 picks, but 3 of those are in the 5th and 7th round. So you have 4 premium picks to try and address these positions. And so it's tough if you're going to use your most valuable draft asset at the running back position to then turn and try and fill those other 8 holes with 3 other premium picks. But if you can trade down, add some other big picks, then it's like, okay, now we can make sure we can also address some of those more pertinent things and still have the fun running back pick at the beginning that can be that explosive dynamic weapon for your offense, right? It's not that running back wouldn't be valuable. It's just that other spots can be more valuable. And so it's easier to offset the value you're losing by taking a running back in the first round if it's after a trade down, as opposed to staying at 10 and taking a running back that doesn't have such a clear-cut head and shoulders above the rest resume like Ashton Jeanty that, boy, it's a tricky proposition. I think a similar conversation is true for tight end, and I've been doing that a lot lately on the podcast, kind of grouping those together, but I think that's for a very clear reason of that positional value, and it's a combination of, I guess, positional value and need there, where it's like the Bears could go through this draft, not take a running back, and they'll be okay in the backfield. And they could go through this draft and not take a tight end, and they'd be okay at tight end. I'm not sure the same is true for defensive line or offensive line. If you go into this whole draft and didn't add a single offensive lineman, you'd be okay, I guess, but your depth is really going to be iffy there. And same thing on the defensive line, right? Like there's a more of a need draw there, but you don't want to just draft for need in the first round, especially. You want to take best player available, and there's a world where Ashton Jeanty is that, or Tyler Warren is that. But I can't help but look at this tight end class in particular and feel like, man, Colston Loveland from Michigan is a lot closer to Tyler Warren, in my eyes, than Omarion Hampton is to Ashton Jeanty. And that makes things tricky with the 10th overall pick. So we'll take a look at how this tight end class compares and why it wouldn't surprise me if Ben Johnson really likes Colston Loveland for very different reasons than Tyler Warren next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get on the action, because right now when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your $5 bet wins. You can also bet and do the same thing for the Major League Baseball season. The hockey playoffs are right around the corner, and you can look ahead to the NFL draft as well and take advantage of FanDuel's betting options there as well. You can bet on what position the Chicago Bears will take with their first round draft pick, no matter where that pick ends up being. Running back is currently the betting favorite there, but offensive line is not far behind. You can bet on what team drafts Ashton Jeanty, what players go in the first round, and so much more, all in the FanDuel app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. The tight end class is a lot closer at the top for me than the running back class. There's Jeanty, there's a big gap, and then there's Hampton and Henderson and Caleb Johnson and a bunch of other running backs in there. Tight end for me, Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland are not that far apart, and they're different styles of running back. Different styles of tight end. And I can't help but feel like as much as we heard Ben Johnson rave about Tyler Warren, notably when he was specifically asked about Tyler Warren as a prospect, I can't help but look at Colston Loveland from Michigan and feel like that could be a player Johnson quite aligns with because of how much better of a blocker Colston Loveland is than Tyler Warren. And I also think Loveland is refined in some ways that Warren is not. So I think Warren is the more dynamic athlete style of playmaker of, ball in his hands, make you miss after the catch, working you up the seam in the middle of the field. You can see where the pass catcher ceiling is higher there, right? He's more in the mold of someone like Brock Bowers. I don't think he's nearly as good as Brock Bowers, but that style of weapon receiver at the tight end position. But I think Colston Loveland can be, again, not this good of a player, but in the mold of, a George Kittle style of tight end who's a very effective blocker and receiver. And maybe Loveland isn't quite as athletically gifted in that exact same way, but I do think he's someone that when Ben Johnson talks about no block, no rock and the importance of the running game, and when he puts two tight ends on the field, the reason why you go to those two tight end formations is because it's more difficult for the defense to guess what you're going to do, right? The value of having Cole Kmet on the field with another tight end is that those two tight ends are both extra blockers in the running game. So you need, as a defense, you need to put extra players in the box in order to defend the run. So it condenses the defense and puts more players up near the line of scrimmage so that then as an offense, when you pass, whether it's play action or just a straight drop back passing play out of that, you now have heavier personnel closer to the line of scrimmage, more space for your receivers on the outside. They may have taken a safety and made it a single deep safety coverage, bringing a safety down in the box. And then the goal or the hope is that your tight ends, who are significant threats as blockers, are also then significant threats as receivers. And Cole Kmet and somebody like Colston Loveland can be that as well. And then they're getting matched up with linebackers or safeties from the box, the players that may be in there to stop the run, but they're now trying to turn and run in coverage with your tight ends who also happen to be good receivers, right? It's having that true threat to the defense of run blocking and receiving from the tight end position that creates the most value in Ben Johnson's offense. And someone like Tyler Warren, you can line up in that position, you can ask him to block, and he'll block okay. Like he's not an abysmal, terrible blocker who offers you no value there. But I think as an opposing defense, maybe you're feeling a little less threatened by the run blocking you're getting on Tyler Warren's side. So maybe you don't have to put, you don't have to get a safety outside of him or a linebacker outside of him because you trust that, hey, my linebacker can fight through his block and still set the edge, or my defensive end can fight through him. I don't need to load up that side of the line of scrimmage. Whereas someone like Colston Loveland has been a much more consistent, refined blocker. Not that he's like perfect by any means, but someone who has a much higher blocking upside there. And of course, if you're taking a tight end in the top 10 of the draft, you're not necessarily specifically drafting him for his blocking, but would you rather have him in a TJ Hawkinson style of tight end in that regard? And I wonder how Ben Johnson might feel about those guys. At the 10th overall pick, that's where, again, we come back to that best player available conversation that we were doing with Omarion Hampton and the running back spot. Like, is Colston Loveland going to be better than, again, Michael Williams from Georgia, Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, Kelvin Banks from Texas, or one of the defensive backs like Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron from Texas? Like, when you're picking 10th, right, you want to go best player available. Get the most talented guy that's just going to add the most playmaking ability to your team, wherever that is, and acquire good players and figure it out later. Like top 10 picks, you don't want to be picking in the top 10. The Bears are not planning on picking in the top 10 again anytime soon. You want to be in the playoffs. This is your last chance to add a quote-unquote top 10 caliber player in the NFL draft without having to trade up and give everything up to do so. And so get that player here. And if to the Bears, that's Tyler Warren, go for it. Get him. Go get your guy. If that's Colston Loveland, go for it. Get him. I mean, it's so hard to see a scenario where it's Omarion Hampton or even Colston Loveland. I mean, and for me, Tyler Warren is even a tough sell there. I know he's sort of viewed in this blue chip prospect caliber of like, he's going to go top 7. I hope someone else takes him and not the Chicago Bears. I think I'd be a little disappointed with Tyler Warren as my first one pick, despite you can put him in the backfield and do all that stuff. Like, I get it, but I would rather go more of a premium position in a player that I think can be a really like cornerstone piece of my franchise with that 10th overall pick. but you re-enter the trade down conversation, and it's like, even if it was a shorter trade down to 12 or 14, take somebody like Colston Loveland there, I think it'd be a lot easier of a sell. Because again, you're adding that other draft pick to say, yeah, tight end might be more of a luxury there, but then you can address O-line and D-line and other positions that really need long-term future players there with the extra picks you add in the trade plus your extra second round pick, right? Once you trade down, that opens up the math a little bit easier there. And it's easier to then sell me on Colston Loveland being the best player available there. If some of those other guys come off the board between when you pick and when you trade down, he can re-enter that conversation in more of a firm category. And I think I can see where Ben Johnson in this offense might like a player like Loveland a little bit more than somebody like Tyler Warren, especially when you think about, offensive coordinator Declan Doyle as a tight ends coach coming over from the Denver Broncos, where they had guys like Adam Troutman and bigger bodied guys who can block a little bit more and not so much of that athletic receiving, Greg Dulcich in there, or even, in New Orleans before that, like this Juwan Johnson, that style of guy. Like, I could see Loveland being a player the Bears end up liking more than we realize on the outside. I still don't think it's likely that Loveland is the pick, that a running back not named Jeanty is the pick, or even I'd be surprised if it's Tyler Warren at this point in the process either. I think the Bears ultimately go O-line, D-line, or Jeanty with that pick. That's what the betting market is currently leaning towards for Chicago as well. But a trade down changes everything. And personally, I think that might be Ryan Poles' first priority. But we've talked on this podcast about trading down is easier to do on paper and in a mock draft simulator than it is in real life, because other teams are going to have a player they want to trade up for if you're going to be trading down. And if you're trading down and because you don't like any of the players, then why is another team going to like the players that they're trading up for? We went through some of the nuances of that and what scenarios that could happen a couple weeks ago on the podcast. So go take a look back at that one if you haven't listened to that already. And just make sure you keep making Locked On Bears your first listen each and every day. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. If you're looking for a second listen today, you can always check out the Locked On NFL podcast for even more football talk. I co-host it on Tuesday mornings with Tyler Rowland from Locked On Titans, and today we were talking about the NFL equivalents of the redemption story of Rory McIlroy winning the Masters and finally breaking through there. We talked about Lamar Jackson, we talked about Kirk Cousins, we talked about Kyle Shanahan and Mike Vrabel and the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Buffalo Bills as teams needing their Rory McIlroy level of breakthrough. So there's more football talk over on Locked On NFL. There's more draft talk on Locked On NFL Draft. And the Locked On Podcast Network covers all of your favorite teams every single day in the NBA, NHL, MLB, and college sports. So go find another Locked On podcast to be your second listen today. Coming back tomorrow, make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.